All right, episode 3. This is where it counts. So, just since this is my actual music channel here, I want to at least start with giving some small update on what I'm doing. Um, I didn't record anything this weekend. I kind of needed the time to just sort of get caught up and clean the house a little bit, trying to downsize a little and declutter, I guess you'd say. Just make life simpler and make it to where whatever projects I'm trying to do are more sustainable in the future. The last cover I posted was a collective soul song from the early 90s called All. And I wouldn't say I really went into it trying to make a masterpiece of a cover song. I did rework some of the lyrics a little bit to kind of fit a different perspective, I guess you'd say. But I was kind of more concerned with trying my hand at animation, even though it was just simple and done in paint. And I wanted the music to kind of be there to help tell the story that was in the animation. And also, I recently upgraded a lot of my equipment for, my bedroom recording studio. Got some new plugins. There was a lot of new things to learn. I really wasn't all that good at mixing before, and this song was a good chance to learn a lot more. I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near like professional level yet, but I do think my mixes are coming out clearer at the very least. And I also had to work on the mastering a tiny bit, which I've never done any of that whatsoever. So I really couldn't have told you before what a limiter does. But anyway, with all that out of the way, I wanted to get into a topic that I think is kind of meaningful for anybody. It's basically about how we all want to leave a legacy in some way, but at the same time, we have to kind of recognize that that's not entirely possible, at least not in the way that we imagine it. So, picture if somebody died, and let's just say they were maybe early 20s, maybe mid 20s, somewhere in there, and their mother went through their stuff and found a notebook full of poems and never even realized that her son could write like that and felt like he was saying something meaningful that the entire world needed to hear. So she goes and contacts a publishing company. However, this actually works, I don't personally know. And they agree to publish it. And they say, okay, well, we'll start with a small run, see how that does. And she might sit there and insist, okay, well, I'm grateful you're taking it, but this is great stuff. Like, take a chance on it. Just put it out there. The entire world needs to hear it. He was amazing. Like, nobody even knew that he could do this stuff. And they might humor her and up the run a little bit higher or something, or just say, well, we're going to do this. And then, hopefully the projections will hold and we can up the run and do a second run right after it. So let's say this all works out and they end up doing several runs, and over a 10-year period, they sell 1 million copies of it. And then they say, okay, well, now the numbers are starting to dwindle. These things come and go in trends, and the hype kind of died down. Anyone that was going to read his work has pretty much read it, and it's not really worth us printing more runs. Now, she might get a little bent out of shape about that and still insist that his legacy needs to get carried on. So let's say that she lives on for at least another 30 years, and then she gets into a conversation with somebody about poetry in general. And she's like, oh, yeah, my son was a great poet, and we got his work published after he died. He wrote this book, or this was his name. And they'd be like, oh, I never heard of him. And she might get a little irate about it, like, well, how did you never hear of him? He was on the New York Times bestseller list for 2 years straight back in this year. And that person might be like, well, it's a little before my time, or whatever the reason is. Trends kind of come and go, and not everything carries forward in immortality. But my point is that somebody who might recognize someone's work, whether it's their own or somebody that they lost or just cared about or whatever, and really insist that there's value for all eternity in this work and it should always be remembered. And they're not exactly wrong, but how realistic is that? If you were to go back far enough in time to try to figure which humans were pretty cultured and could actually appreciate these kind of things like art and writing and storytelling and whatever else, um, let's just say from who's alive today back to that point in time when that would have started. Let's just say you've got 20 billion humans, and you wanted to say, well, each one of them did something amazing in their own way, whether it was philosophical thought or writing a story or making a painting, writing a song, writing poems, whatever they did. And you wanted to honor each one of those people that ever lived. So you were going to devote at least 15 minutes to each person that ever lived and that is alive now and whatever they're doing. That would literally take you 500,000 years. And that's not even figuring sleeping or eating or anything like that. So you could easily say this could take 1,000,000 years just to give 15 minutes to somebody. And if you take somebody like, say, one of the classic authors, like Charles Dickens, I'm not sure how many books he wrote, but I think it's at least 50 or more. So how much could you get to know about just Charles Dickens in 15 minutes? And how much honor are you paying to his writing within 15 minutes? You couldn't even read probably one chapter out of any of his books in that amount of time, let alone an entire book. So how much honor are you really giving him? And 15 minutes already isn't a reasonable amount of time to give to one person or to each person. Even if you took a second to read each person's name, if you could read it in just 1 second each, that would take you over 600 years. So unless you hold the idea that nothing in this life matters because there's an afterlife that's better or whatever it is you want to believe, if you just ultimately don't think anything matters, this is kind of something that everybody faces at some point. Like, what do they actually leave behind? What will they be remembered for? And who's going to remember it? Because it's already impossible for each person to get remembered that much. I mean, we have some big names in history that do stand out. But even at that, I mean, there's plenty of writings or pieces of art from the ancient world that we have no idea who made them, even if we could still read them or look at them and appreciate them. So that person's name is lost to history, even if their work wasn't. So I think there's different ways to kind of make peace with this idea that everything is kind of short-lived, at least when you're comparing it over thousands of years. I just want to sidestep for a second. There's 3 concepts that I think kind of make all this a little bit easier to deal with. First is Carl Jasper's theory about the axial age, which is roughly like 800 BC to 200 BC. And you pretty much have people that are unconnected all having a sort of spiritual awakening or more of a philosophical era of reasoning that developed at the same time. And some of the ideas are even the same. So you've got like Socrates and Plato kind of being contemporaries with Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, a lot of the Old Testament Hebrew prophets in the later era that would fit in that time period. And so by way of explaining that, there's Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious and Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance. One would be more psychological, maybe even spiritual, the collective unconscious one. And the morphic resonance is a little bit more biological, I guess you could say. So if you take the basic idea that if somebody had ever thought of something or ever actually done something, then that thought and that pattern of behavior could actually be copied later on by a different human that may not be directly related. I'm really into studying ancient texts and philosophical writings and just anything in general, just about. I mean, I'm always thinking about stuff. My job is a little bit monotonous at times, so I have a lot of time to just stand there and think about things or to listen to things that get me thinking, and then I might pause them and, work with that in my head a little. But a lot of these ideas that all three of these people that I mentioned came up with, I had already thought of them on my own. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying these ideas were already thought by them. They might have been thought by somebody else before them. So I think they're kind of there for us to kind of pick up on and rediscover. My personal belief is anything that you do, whether it's artistically or intellectually or whatever it is, or even whatever you think, actually does carry on in some way and could benefit people in ways you don't see. I mean, some of them could be direct. You could write a song that makes somebody feel understood for the first time in their life, or same with a poem. You can make a beautiful piece of art and somebody can look at it and maybe temporarily forget about the stress they're feeling and find peace. And maybe that peaceful feeling that they got that day helped them get through something else that was an even bigger issue. So I think whether we're trying to help someone else to be remembered or we want to be remembered ourselves for something, it's not something that we can obsess over. We really can't control exactly what will happen with it. And no matter what we do with it, you go far enough in history and it's going to be forgotten. I mean, the effect of it will still be felt in some way or another. The idea is still in the universal unconsciousness. So maybe it's just a matter of doing what we believe in, what we think is right or what we think has value, and letting time decide what to do with that. Because whatever we put out there is always going to be there to some extent. And I think probably the best quote for it is at the end of the movie, The Cloud Atlas, which I kind of want to do a video about a lot of movies that were deeper than they got credit for. But anyway, the quote at the end of the movie was, "My life amounts to no more than one drop in a limitless ocean. Yet what is any ocean but a multitude of drops?"